Due to the recent reveal within Jujutsu Kaisen, I think it would be a good idea for us to talk about the relationship between Geto and Gojo, and ultimately why Gojo had to get rid of Geto. But before we begin, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so I can always keep bringing you more anime content. So, the thing about Geto and Gojo's relationship is that it was fundamentally always a push and pull throughout the majority of Jujutsu Kaisen. I think it's really funny that when we look at, hidden inventory, they were the polar opposites. Gojo was rather reckless, he was overtly confident, and I mean, it's not like Gojo's necessarily humble in, the main time period, but he is more considerate of those around him, especially those who are weaker than him. Geto and Gojo's relationship was originally his only really fixture with other people, whereas Geto kind of, I think, always had connection to other people. He had two human parents, and he was presumably in like regular schooling from the time he was a kid, so the relationship really served a balance. And then upon both going to Jujutsu High, their relationship flourished into a beautiful friendship, or if you're a shipper, more than that. But they were close, that is undeniable, and that closeness was an essential part of them. I think that it complemented not only their personalities to have somebody that was constantly pushing, but somebody that was also guiding. Not necessarily slowing. I wouldn't say Geto ever tried to stop Gojo. He just tried to guide him towards being a better sorcerer and a better person, which did work. I mean, over the course of that adventure, with bonding more with Geto and bonding with, Rico, he does become more attached to humanity as a causality of that. So it was an important relationship, and ultimately I think that Geto leaving hurt him badly. It didn't hurt him in a way that he wanted revenge. I think it finally was the catalyst that shocked him into kind of realizing that not everybody is as strong as him, and because of that, the one person who did understand him and did really love him, interpret that how you will, left, and he was lonely. He was actually lonely for the first time, I think, in a long time. Because of that, it forced him to go out of his circle. He went and found Megami. He went and found other people who needed his help, and he started teaching. We do get the reference in Jujutsu Kaisen that in his role as a teacher, he did it to help basically change the Jujutsu world. But let's be honest, he didn't need to do that. Gojo could have very easily overthrown the Jujutsu government, hands down. It wouldn't have even been a question. The only people that could have stopped him, potentially, were Suguru Geto and, Yuki. That's not a long list, and even when they threw Okotsu on there, Okotsu was one of his students. He was going to side with Gojo and his friends more than anything else. With that in mind, it's clear to see that their relationship was formative, and I think that's why we get so heartbroken when it's revealed in Jujutsu Kaisen that Geto died. Geto died not only within the series, Geto died a long time ago. Geto was killed after Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and he was killed by Satoru Gojo. But I think Gojo felt that he had to do that for a reason, and that's what we're going to get into next. So, why did Gojo have to ultimately take out Suguru Geto? There's a couple of different answers to that. I think the first one that a lot of people would come to would simply be that he was a curse user, but that one isn't quite correct. And the reason for that is that Suguru Geto became a curse user in his final year of high school. He left the school, they were about, probably 18 at that time. In regular Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo is 28. That means that 0 takes place when he's 27. That is a 9-year gap. He could have fought with Suguru Geto at any point during that. He just had no interest in doing so, which kind of makes sense. Geto was his best friend, and unless directly provoked, I don't think Gojo necessarily felt a profound urge to have to defeat him. Yes, he had basically gone out of his mind, and that was terrible, but I think the other things that Gojo probably took into account with that were they didn't have evidence that he had taken care of his parents, which is one of the theories presented by Yaga. They don't have any evidence of that. They're theorizing that it could be, but that's not enough to actually institute Gojo doing anything about it, though I'm sure he probably thought the same thing. And then the other factor is that they did know was that, Geto had attacked the village, but In Gojo's rationalization, the village was guilty, just as probably how Geto had pictured it. The village had been holding, two little girls hostage and had been beating them and keeping them prisoner. I don't think, Gojo felt the particular urge to try and avenge that particular incident. Keeping in mind that, in the Star Plasma Association, he pretty much was going to wipe out the whole facility, followers and all. In his mind, that was not enough of a crime to actually institute getting rid of Geto. And of course, any conflicts with other Jujutsu sorcerers was kept to a minimum. Geto pretty much says he stayed off their radar for the better part of 9 years, hiding and gathering strength. That's, it doesn't really give Gojo any reason to go looking for him. So, if none of those were the reason, what was? And in my opinion, it was threatening the students. Suguru Geto attacked not only Jujutsu sorcerers, which Gojo may or may not have a personal issue with. I think it's depending on the sorcerer and his relationship to them. But the sorcerers we know he's closest with are Principal Yaga, and then all of his students. When Geto threatened his students, in particular Okotsu, and then nearly killing Maki, as well as Panda and Inamaki, I don't think that Gojo could let that go. I think that that was an unacceptable causality, especially because he's saying he would do it again. When Geto is defeated by Okotsu and he's missing an arm and he's bleeding profusely, he says, though, I'll get away and I'll come back again because if I have, Rika, I can take over everything. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. And Gojo definitely overheard that. He was in an alleyway. Gojo's on the upper end of it with his 6 eyes are fully out. He heard everything that Geto said there, and I think that's kind of when he really knew that there was no saving his old friend. Because his old friend did something that would have been repugnant to him when he was a kid. Not the idea of, her, taking people out who'd been abusive to somebody else, but the idea that he had tried to hurt an innocent person for no other reason than his own self-gain. By that time, even though Geto does have an interesting core philosophy, and to be honest, in another video I'll go over that Geto and Gojo's core philosophies are actually quite similar. Their routes to achieving that are drastically different, but they are similar, and I think that's also why Gojo let him go for so long. But Gojo's guiding rule had been not harming innocent people, and that was something Geto had attempted to do when he attempted to take Rika for Yuta. He couldn't tolerate that anymore, and so I think he had to take out Geto. So, was that all there was in their relationship? Not quite. When Gojo is killed, and he's sent to the afterlife, we are given a glimpse as to what his afterlife at least looks like. And I know there's some debate as to whether this is actually an afterlife or just a hallucination. I think the series gives us enough context to say this is an actual afterlife. Everybody who's in it is already dead. One of the characters who's there references talking with another character that Gojo could not have been privy to that conversation at any point. It's not something that character would have shared. So if I had to bet, this is actually the afterlife. We also know from Jogo that humans do linger on after death the same way curse spirits do. To be fair, we also know this from Rika. Rika became a curse spirit and then turned back into a human spirit and went off and turned into bubbles and went to presumably whatever the good version of afterlife is in Jujutsu Kaisen. I think this is a very similar version of that because there's more than enough hints that there's an afterlife and Gojo's meeting up with them. Now, obviously, there's an interesting indication here because of the characters that are here. One of them that is here is Geto. But there's also an interesting comparison that this is young Geto, not the Geto that necessarily lost his mind. And I think that there's an interesting compare and contrast of sorcerers are not heroes. So the idea of around morality and what happens to a person in the afterlife is, A, drastically different in a lot of Asian cultures anyway, like in Japan. There's, even in Japan's 3 major religions, there's variants on what happens when you die. Jujutsu seems to take inspiration from all 3 of those anyway. And then in Jujutsu Kaisen, morality is in and of itself an interesting concept. Sorcerers aren't heroes, and therefore their actions are neither good nor bad. They're usually a combination of both. So, especially young Geto would probably be more viewed as a hero, And older Geto, like I said, shares an ideology that is similar to Gojo's, but more extreme. It's complicated to say how that would affect anything in that regards, but they do seem to have ended up in the same place, and it is a good place. It's a place where they're both happy. And I think it's really interesting that since they end up together in this afterlife, there's no frustration between them. There's no accusation, there's nothing. I think that Geto had accepted that Gojo was going to do what he did to him, and then he knew the reason why. And now they're together in their afterlife. They're in a happy place because we saw, Rico and Kuroi, we saw Haibara, we saw a lot of people that have been lost. And now they're in a better place altogether. So I think that their relationship ended on a surprisingly positive note. And I do think it's really funny that they don't tell us, even here, what Gojo said to Geto in the alleyway. But I, like many, am a firm believer in it was him telling him he loved him. Again, you can infer context however you would like from that, but I think that's what it was, and that seems to be the relationship that they have and always will maintain. I hope you guys liked the video. Please be sure to subscribe if you did enjoy it, and like it so more people can find out about it. See you later.